And welcome to the Indie Media Show. I'm Robin Seidel. Today we'll be talking about the mixed waste landfill with two very special guests. Eileen O'Shaughnessy is the co-founder of Nuclear Issues Study Group. She's also a doctoral student and an instructor at UNM and CNM. And Dave McCoy. He's the executive director of Citizen Action and an attorney. But before we dive into our conversation about the mixed waste landfill, let's watch a short video prepared by the nonprofit organization Available Media for a brief bit of background on the mixed waste landfill.
The mixed waste landfill is loaded with plutonium, americium, depleted uranium, chemical solvents, and heavy metals, moving 24 hours a day beneath the dump toward Albuquerque's drinking water supply. Waste in this lethal dump are in unlined pits and trenches under a compacted dirt cover installed in 2009. Scientists say the dirt cover can easily be breached by plants, insects, water, and humans. In 2006, TechLaw wrote a report to the New Mexico Environment Department which suggested the dirt cover will not remain intact, lacks adequate monitoring for moisture, and has no liner underneath to prevent the waste from moving downward to the aquifer water supply below. The Sandia Mixed Waste Landfill toxic dump has 119 barrels of radioactive waste, plutonium-238, 239, and radioactive americium-241, tritium, as well as tens of thousands of pounds of depleted uranium, lead, beryllium, PCBs, and chlorinated solvents. The types and amounts of waste were poorly inventoried, and many years of records were destroyed. Simply stated, Sandia does not even know exactly what is in its mixed waste dump. For decades, stormwater washed into its unlined pits and trenches, and 275,000 gallons of nuclear reactor wastewater were dumped into one trench. A uranium chip fire in one trench had to be put out with 5,000 gallons of water. Much of the radioactive waste comes from experiments done on nuclear fuel rods and pellets used in power nuclear reactors. High-level waste that comes from irradiating nuclear fuel in a reactor is required to be contained in a deep geologic repository where it will remain safe for at least 10,000 years, like the WIPP facility. The Department of Energy, Sandia, and the Environment Department knowingly continue to break environmental laws and regulations by allowing these wastes to remain and continue to threaten the safety of human health and the environment. It's all about Lockheed Martin, Sandia, and the Department of Energy saving money. Administrative records, including a 2010 Environmental Protection Agency Inspector General report and reports by hydrologist Robert Gilkison, show the mixed waste landfill groundwater monitoring network remains defective. Dangerous contamination and accidents happen when regulations and maintenance procedures are ignored. Not to mention possible terrorist attacks on this nuclear waste dump just south of the city of Albuquerque.
But it doesn't take a terrorist attack to cause an explosion at a mixed waste landfill. According to Department of Energy memorandum, the Sandia mixed waste landfill contains metallic sodium, which can create an explosion when it comes in contact with water. In October of 2015, a mixed waste nuclear dump 11 miles south of Beatty, Nevada, exploded. The explosion closed a 140-mile stretch of State Highway 140 for almost 24 hours. Authorities later concluded that moisture had penetrated a protective earthen cap covering and had come into contact with metallic sodium in corroded steel drums. The explosion released radioactive and toxic waste into the air, which drifted over 5 states. This is the same possible scenario that could play out at the Sandia Mixed Waste Landfill here in Albuquerque. Sandia Labs, managed by Lockheed Martin, receives over $3.9 billion a year for its operations in Albuquerque. Sandia President Paul Robertson and the DOE need to contribute to and not threaten Albuquerque's public health and safety by excavating their toxic dump and disposing of the waste safely. The dump's waste continue to seep into the ground. Cleanup will become much more expensive and difficult.
Thanks again to Available Media for that very informative video. Let's start with you, Dave. If we could, in the video, we saw that the mixed waste landfill is fairly close to Albuquerque. Where exactly is it? How close is it to the aquifer that we depend on? And how close really to the Rio Grande?
It's about 5 miles south of the Sunport, a little over a mile from Mesa del Sol, a couple of miles from Isleta Pueblo. There's it's unique in that it's on the Kirtland Air Force Base, so you have a nuclear weapons laboratory operating on a military base. That's unusual. And it's crisscrossed with I-40, I-25. There's hospitals around, schools, that kind of thing. As far as how close it is to the water, it's about 450 feet above the water table. But monitoring that was done and reported in 2016 showed that there's chlorinated substances, PCE and TCE, that are only about 50 feet above the aquifer. But it could be in the aquifer because they're not monitoring in the aquifer at that point for those chemicals. Mm-hmm. So that's problematic.
So it's called mixed waste landfill, but is it really a landfill, or what is it really?
It's not a landfill. Originally it was called the radioactive waste dump. And the reason it's not a landfill is that a landfill is made with very technical specifications, including liners that are underneath it. There have to be liners under the cover. There have to be liners under the toxic material. There has to be a mechanism for collecting leachate and pumping it out and disposing of it properly. And the mixed waste landfill is none of those things. They simply dug mainly 6 trenches and then a lot of pits, and haphazardly threw things into those pits and trenches, and they were in, cardboard cartons, wooden boxes, steel containers that can corrode over time. So none of it was contained very well, and all of that can ultimately leak to the aquifer as it's currently doing.
Yeah. So going back to the video one more time, it showed an explosion in Beatty, Nevada. How similar is our mixed waste landfill here in Albuquerque to that, and could that happen here?
Beatty and the mixed waste landfill are kind of sister dumps in the sense that they're both out in the desert. They're in very dry areas. What happened at Beatty, Nevada was there was subsidence, which can happen at the mixed waste landfill because all these containers collapse over time, the cover sinks, you get pools of water that can form, enter into the dump. At Beatty, Nevada, they had rainwater, a very heavy storm. It entered into the dump and hit corroded containers of metallic sodium. And in the mixed waste landfill, we also have a record that there were fuel rods that had been irradiated and used metallic sodium as a coolant, which is in the mixed waste landfill. There's evidence of several canisters of that, and those could explode just as happened at Beatty, Nevada. And of course, Beatty, Nevada is 40 miles away, whereas the mixed waste landfill is right next door. If you can imagine, you know, having plutonium blasted into your neighbor and having to decontaminate your car and the hospital and schools and a military base, it could be an extremely dangerous proposition.
Speaking of that, Eileen, you want to talk to us a little bit about the health and safety that these materials pose and what we know, what we don't know?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that Sandia themselves don't know and admit to not knowing. And that's what's really concerning, because the record keeping prior to 1964, so the dump was open from 1959 to 1988, and the record keeping was really awful, as is common with, you know, Manhattan Project era nuclear activities. I mean, I just want to say one more thing to what Dave was just speaking to with Beatty and the explosion that happened there. You know, this dump, mixed waste landfill, it's on the edge of an urban, highly populated area. And it is potentially explosive with the presence of metallic sodium, which was also in Beatty, Nevada. And, you know, what's so concerning about that is we live in a desert ecosystem. And you know, I never ever want to curse the rain, especially not in the desert. But every time it rains in Albuquerque, I worry. I think about the mixed waste landfill, because what happens when metallic sodium comes in contact with water is it is explosive. And we have these incredible monsoon seasons. And we're also in the midst of climate change, where everything is unpredictable, right? So that's incredibly concerning. But to answer your question, Robin, what's in it and, you know, what should we know in terms of public health and safety? I mean, there's a laundry list. It's called a mixed waste landfill because it contains radioactive, hazardous, and chemical materials all thrown together in a jumble. I mean, this is a relic of the Cold War mentality, which was leap before you look, dump before you think, you know, just dump it in an unlined hole and we'll deal with it later. And there's a lot of long-lived radionuclides in this dump, which are incredibly concerning for human health. Right above our aquifer. And I just saw the Albuquerque Water Utility report, which said that because we're in a drought, we are now going to be switching from the amount of surface water from the river that we were using to 100% groundwater from now until November. So what that means is our groundwater is even that much more precious. And, you know, if these materials do hit the groundwater and we are consuming them, that's obviously of great concern, but we also have to think about non-human life, animals and plants that are around this site. And one other thing I wanted to share is that in 1999, Sandia actually conducted a risk assessment of the dump, and they concluded that people could not live near this site because of the cancer risk of the, you know, with the materials that were there. And so what they did is they labeled it, or they designated it for industrial land use. And the thing last thing I want to say about that is the risk assessments that we use, that the NRC uses, the EPA, and these regulatory bodies for radioactive materials, for what's safe for our bodies, is based on what's called reference man, which is an adult Caucasian man who's able-bodied and healthy, and right, and
150 pounds.
150 pounds, yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing that we know is really concerning about this is that the people who are most at risk and most vulnerable for radioactive exposure are the unborn, are children, and actually women, and people with uteruses. So we need to kind of understand why that is and do some more scientific research. But what that means in summary is that our risk assessments are too high. They're not actually properly, you know, representing what the risk is.
Or the population.
Or the population,
the risk
exactly.
to the population.
Yeah.
Very serious stuff here.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention well, you were talking about we don't know what's in the dump, is there is 6,000 sheets of things that were disposed in there, but there was a classified section in the dump for putting secret military chemicals and products and that kind of thing. So a lot of that, we don't know what's in there.
Yeah.
So who's monitoring it, and what problems have there been with the regulators? I know both of you have been watching them or watchdogging them, right?
Well, the monitoring has been a problem since they put in the very first monitoring wells in 1989. By 1991, they realized that the monitoring wells were all in the wrong place and could not give adequate data. They hid that information. When 2004 came along and they wanted to talk about remedies, should we excavate the dump, should we just put a dirt cover over it, they said, well, there's no evidence of contamination. Well, they didn't have a monitoring network that was even capable of detecting contamination because they had steel casings in the wells. Those were subject to rust, which keeps you from seeing contamination. They used bentonite, which absorbs contamination. So there was a whole plethora of things. And the New Mexico Environment Department knew that those monitoring wells were no good, but they wouldn't admit it during the hearing. And so they approved this dirt cover that they put over it. In 2007, myself and Bob Gilkison, on behalf of Citizen Action, filed a complaint with EPA Region 6 and said, hey, look, you know, the groundwater monitoring network there is no good. So after pressure from our state senator Bingham, and the EPA Region 6 agreed to do an oversight review. Well, there was so much pressure on them from the New Mexico Environment Department to not talk about the earlier data not being adequate to support the dirt cover being in place, that they refused to give us the technical report that they wrote. Citizen Action had to not only sue the EPA Region 6, we had to sue the EPA Inspector General because he had the report and wouldn't give it to us. So finally they gave it to us, and the report basically agreed with the problems that we'd been raising, and the Inspector Generals who looked at the situation had said that EPA Region 6 had improperly withheld this report by putting a national security designation of a confidential on it. And they agreed with the findings that the Citizen Action and Robert Gilkison, the hydrologist, had made about the lack of effective groundwater monitoring, and they're still using defective groundwater monitoring today. They put in some new wells, they put them in the wrong way, the well screens are too long, et cetera, et cetera. So they still don't have the adequate data. And the problem is with the regulators is you go in with them to these different hearings. They are able to appoint the hearing officer. So hearing officers like to work. There's so much bias in the system. They don't want to listen to the public. It doesn't matter what your experts want to present. They don't want to take it into account. So they finally had a corrective action complete hearing in 2015, and the final order came out in 2016. Fortunately, the secretary then for the Environment Department said, hey, look, you've either got to consider making a new actual regulated landfill with liners and protection and everything, or you've got to consider excavation and complete removal from the from Sandia. And so that was that decision was made, And then there was a 5-year review done in 2019. And Sandia said, yeah, we can excavate it. We can do that.
Yeah.
We can remove it. All we need is an order from the New Mexico Environment Department to start the process, and we can begin as early as June 2020, which was over a year ago.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't heard anything from the Environment Department about this.
Yeah.
They could have started the ball rolling. It's no big deal for them to write an order to Sandia Labs to start the process.
Yeah.
So that goes to, Eileen, I wanted to ask you a little bit about public participation and
Yeah.
public information and education about this and public action.
Absolutely. Well, and I was just going to say to what Dave was just saying, I mean, both of our groups, so Citizen Action and the Nuclear Issue Study Group, we've been working, I mean, Dave's been working on this issue much longer than, maybe than I've been alive, I don't know. Massive hat tip to you, Dave. But, you know, for the 5-year review that Dave just mentioned, in 2019, our groups gathered over 350 comments that we submitted to the New Mexico Environment Department, urging them to issue this corrective action measure. And you know, that was well before COVID hit, I just want to say.
Right.
But that has been one of the excuses that has been put out there is, oh, you know, the pandemic,
COVID,
right?
right.
Yeah, and obviously the New Mexico Environment Department has raised concerns about being underfunded or not having the resources, and that's relevant, but we're talking again about a radioactive, hazardous chemical dump that's sitting above our aquifer that's potentially explosive, next to a city, next to Isla de Pueblo, next to so many communities. I mean, what is it going to take to take action, right? And so we've submitted those letters. We've never heard anything back from those folks. I did want to just, if I could, read a quote from someone, and I'll reveal who this is, because I think this is
Oh,
this
good,
is
a reveal.
This is a very powerful quote, and I often share this in my class. This is no ordinary landfill. It's unlike any other dump in the U.S. It's full of extremely hazardous and highly radioactive materials. In order to protect the environment and human health, it should be excavated and landfilled in a secure, engineered facility. It is no exaggeration to say that if the material in the landfill were distributed around the world and people were exposed, it would kill everyone on Earth. Now, this quote,
Oh, that's...
in that last
heavy
sentence,
quote.
right? This quote is not from a radical activist. It's from Dr. Eric Nuttall, who is a former professor at UNM in the Chemical and Nuclear Engineering Department. He is a nuclear engineer himself. And he's done a lot of whistleblowing and awareness raising on this topic. So that's the level of risk that we're talking about. And as far as public action, we need people power. We need people to be sounding the alarm, because this is no joke.
And so, to that point about people sounding the alarm, how do people get in touch with Nuclear Issues Study Group or Citizen Action, or what do you suggest that people do at this point to force the NMED, New Mexico Environment Department, to write that order that you spoke of, Dave? What do we do? What do we ask people to do? What can people do?
Well, of course, you can always write letters and make phone calls. I've often thought a mass demonstration of about 500 people waiting to speak to the Secretary of the Environment Department and his office would be an appropriate thing to engage in. You know, it may be that a lawsuit needs to be brought against them. I mean, it's been over 2.5 years, going on 3 years. Another 5-year review is due in another couple of years. What does the Environment Department consider as a reasonable time frame to respond to the public and also to put out a report reviewing the 5-year report that Sandia put out? So it may be that something like a lawsuit, writ of mandamus, ordering the New Mexico Environment Department may ultimately be needed. I'm not sure. It just seems unreasonable that they've waited so long when they've been given full information as to the fact that this excavation and removal process is feasible, cost-effective, would be safe, would be a better option than leaving the waste in place at the mixed waste landfill, or building a new landfill, because if they put it in a new landfill, then it's got to go through an entire regulatory process all again. They've got to monitor it for the next 1,000 years, you know, and on and on. So, you know, you look at this and you know, if anybody from the Environment Department is listening, I ask you to start thinking about what you're going to do here. And we invited you to come to this meeting today, and you all refused. So, you know, quit hiding. Let's get on with the project.
So it sounds like we have sort of a legal avenue to take, and also hopefully a grassroots and community-centered avenue. Eileen, I know that you do a lot with community education as well as regular education in the universities, but you also are a poet and a musician and a songwriter.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that to inspire people to take action, you would share one of your songs with us.
I'd love to, yeah. I actually was inspired to write a song about the mixed waste landfill, and it's called "The Hole in the Ground." So, yeah, I can play the
great.
song and maybe say a few more words about it afterwards.
That would be great, yes.
Great.
Eileen O'Shaughnessy, the name of your band is?
Eileen and the In-Betweens.
Eileen and the In-Betweens.
All right, this is a song I wrote about the mixed waste landfill, and it's called "The Hole in the Ground." Come gather round, I'll tell you about the hole in the ground. It's a hole in the ground where we bury our secrets deep, deep down. See, we all want to look up, not down. That's the problem with the hole in the ground. Nobody sees, nobody cares about the hole in the ground. And the men in suits, the scientists, they say don't worry about all of this. They just want to keep making bombs and doing the things they've been doing all along. So shh, just go back to sleep. Your water is fine. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to see. Oh, it takes courage. Oh, it takes wisdom. Oh, it takes patience to look at the hole in the ground, to see what is buried deep down, to clean up that hole in the ground. See, up on the hill, they're looking down. They don't care what's underground. So it's time that the people come together now. So it's time that the people come together now. So it's time to face our demons and clean up that hole in the ground.
Oh, Eileen, thank you for that really wonderful song. You are gifted in so many ways. It's just such an honor to be here with you. And I'll get back to you in just a second. I want to ask Dave a little bit about, you mentioned excavation.
Yes.
And so what are the risks? How could it be done? Who would be responsible? And who would pay for it?
Well, the Sandia says that the risks are relatively low, that actually most of the risk would come from transportation. And they've done this type of thing at different locations in the country. For example, in Idaho, at the Idaho National Laboratory, and they put a building over the area that they want to excavate. It's negative air pressure. Everybody's in full suits with their own air supply. The equipment that's used has cabs that are totally sealed off to any of the fugitive dust that may be there. So it's quite a safe operation, basically. And the federal government would have to pay for it, the Department of Energy, and they need time to get the funding together. So that's another reason why we want to see the Environment Department put out this order in some kind of timely action. And it would take, Sandia estimated, somewhere around 10 years for full excavation and removal of the material. You know, they can't just go in there with a bulldozer and take it all at the same time. They have to go up trench by trench. What's the safest, you know, going by what inventory sheets they have. And so it would have to be a very orderly process to take place.
And I also have heard that people have been asking the New Mexico Environment Department for documents. I mean, if this excavation is possible, we have the technology, what are they afraid of, and why are they not doing it, and what are they hiding from the public?
Well, I don't know, but they have a lengthy history of hiding documents. First, they hid the groundwater monitoring documents that showed their groundwater monitoring wells were defective. That data was no good. Then they hid the tech law report, which was mentioned in the video. And that was an extremely important report because it stated that basically the dirt cover was not going to be protective for the necessary period given the type of contamination that was in that landfill, and that it didn't have liners associated with the dirt cover. So, and then they said that the fate and transport model, which talks about how fast this contamination is going to move from the trenches and pits to the aquifer below or into the environment, they said that that computer model was a black box. Well, during that time, we were in negotiations with them about the fate and transport model. So if we'd have had that documentation, you know, it would have been very interesting to say, hey, your dirt cover is not going to work. And that was before it was put in place. But the Environment Department appealed it for 3 years so that they could put the cover down. And then by the time we got the tech law report, which said cover's not going to be protective, it was a fait accompli.
Right.
You know?
Which seems like the MO of both the DOE, Sandia, and the New Mexico Environment Department is to do these things without the kind of education, and this goes back to you, Eileen, the kind of education that needs to happen for the public, because these folks work for us, right?
Absolutely.
And so talk to us a little, share some of your expertise, your educational expertise. You're a well-known educator in our community, so.
Well, I'm passionate about education for this very reason. I mean, Dave has a lot of experience going up against the walls of secrecy, you know, in these areas of governmental power, but unfortunately that extends to education in some ways. I have found, teaching about this topic, that so many people have grown up in Albuquerque, grown up in New Mexico, and have no idea about this dump site and the risks that contain within. And I think, just one word about that is, with the nuclear weapons industry, there's a really vested interest, and it's a really well documented, presence of secrecy from the very beginning of the Manhattan Project, obviously. Right. And I would say that element of secrecy, it's necessary in order to hide the human rights violations, in order to shroud the environmental, harm that's done, and that those things, if you're going to build nuclear weapons, if you're going to pursue nuclear energy, this is what it looks like. This is the legacy of building nuclear bombs, and we continue to do that in this state. In fact, more plutonium pits at Los Alamos. So, yes. What I've done is I've tried to develop curriculum at the level of higher education to shed light on kind of the full impact of nuclear weapons technology, which is something that, unfortunately, there's not a lot of institutional support for that in some ways. And just want to shout out a really awesome report that was put out a year ago by ICANN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, Nobel Peace Prize winning organization. They put out a report a year ago called Schools of Mass Destruction. And in this report, what they did is they looked at US universities that were integrally involved in supporting nuclear weapons development, whether by research, contracts, sharing of resources. And who do you think is on that list, right?
Oh, let me guess.
UNM.
And
yes,
NMSU,
sadly.
So, but that's something that, perhaps it makes folks uncomfortable to talk about, but what that shows is there is a literal investment in keeping a status quo about nuclear weapons information. And anything that challenges that, right, is out of here. So I think education is vitally important, and I'm always really inspired by what my students come up with when I present this information, and I encourage them, come up with a project that addresses, some of these issues. And we've had public events, we've had art projects, we've had students create maps, and I think that we need to trust human ingenuity, creativity, intelligence, and stop shrouding these things in secrecy.
Yes, we do. And to that end, we urge you all to get in touch with Nuclear Issues Study Group. And how do people do that?
We have a Facebook page and a website, which we will share on the screen later on here.
Okay, great. And also get in touch with Citizen Action. Again, information will be up on the screen. I want to thank our two wonderful, wonderful guests, Dave McCoy of Citizen Action, an attorney who has been fighting the good fight, making good trouble, as John Lewis says, for a long time on this issue. And we thank you for all your work, Dave. It's much appreciated. And Eileen O'Shaughnessy, our multi-talented, sort of next generation, fighter for the light and the right. And so thank you so much for being here, Eileen.
Thanks, Robin.
That's our program for today. Please watch for other indie media shows at the Available Media channel on YouTube. And we thank you so much for being here with us. Until the next Indie Media show, stay informed and stay active. Bye.
So time is extremely short. I wanted to point out how valuable it is to have your individual inputs and how much of an influence it has. You can have experts like myself that talk to the different parties, but they really care and fear the public. And so please be there. Your voice really is heard, and it scares the hell out of them. So we have a situation here where the worst material, the most toxic and hazardous material that mankind has ever been able to make, has been put into the mixed waste landfill. And Sandia has intentionally not talked about this waste. Reactor fuel from nuclear reactors has been put in there. Sandia was charged with looking at the meltdown, like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima, where the cores actually melted. Well, Sandia did that in small laboratory setting and actually put the real fuel pins and fuel rods, as we call it, inside of a big reactor, melted it down, and put some of that waste into the mixed waste landfill. And we have chain of custody data sheets that actually show and clearly identify that. This is the most radioactive. In a matter of minutes, you could get a lifetime dose and be dead. So Congress had passed a law a number of years ago that requires that high-level waste be stored deep underground in geological formations, much like WIP, so that it stays completely away from the biosphere and people. This is the kind of, just a touch of the kind of material that you have in quantity out there. The mixed waste landfill has been hidden from the public in terms of its toxicity, in terms of its content. It's been hidden from the environmental department because Sandia did not want to admit what is in there and how toxic and how dangerous it is and how serious it is. They put in metallic sodium. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but it's explosive and it's mixed with radioactive material. If there's an explosion, the airport will be closed, Sandia will be impacted. All of those facilities out there, as well as the homes and so on around the area of Kirtland Air Force Base. So they've had 2 fires over the years of uranium fires. They even had to dispose of, in the mixed waste landfill, a completely irradiated fire engine from putting out the fire. So it's so dangerous that Sandia will not comment on it. And what they're doing is kicking the ball down, or the can, if you will, is the proper current thinking, down the road, trying to get out from under it so that they don't have to excavate it and put it in proper storage. Now, there's not a scientist that Sandia can hire, bribe, twist their arm, whatever, on the outside that would say anything other than excavation for the mixed waste landfill. The only ones that'll support it are on the Sandia payroll that are directly under the thumb of Sandia management. And we know that from Freedom of Information documents that we obtained. The Sandia management decided to hide what's in that mixed waste landfill so that they would not have to, 1, disclose it and be horribly embarrassed, and 2, dig it up and handle it properly and properly dispose of it, which they can do. So there's enough toxicity, and it's mostly carcinogenic, radioactive. All of those chlorinated solvents are fatal to all of us in here. There's enough material in there, without a doubt, if it were spread around the world, it could kill everybody on the face of the earth.